Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are jumping straight into the deep end of a controversy that's got everything.
It really does.
A Super Bowl ad that ruffled a lot of feathers, a revolutionary medical technology, and, a price tag that makes your wallet weep.
We are talking about the Galeri tests.
We are. And honestly, the context here is fascinating because we aren't just looking at the brochure. We are stress testing the logic of a listener named Elton.
And Elton is not just some casual observer. He's a researcher who was actually in a Galeri study, got the test for free.
Right.
And he was so convinced that he turned around and paid nearly $1,000 out of pocket for his wife to take it.
That is really putting your money where your mouth is. And his email, it was fiery. He's pushing back hard against the critics who call this test a coin flip. He's arguing that for high-risk people, or really anyone terrified of those silent killers, this test is a bargain, even at $1,000.
It's a bold stance, especially since, insurance doesn't cover it yet, and the FDA hasn't given it that full approval for general screening.
Exactly. But his logic is, it's mathematically intriguing. So here is our mission today. Elton has thrown down the gauntlet.
He has.
He says the naysayers are looking at all the wrong numbers. So we're going to take his arguments and run them through the grinder of the latest research. We're talking the Pathfinder 2 study, the simplified data out of Oxford.
And some pretty heavy economic modeling from JAMA and AJMC.
We need to answer one question. Is Elton a genius for buying this fire insurance, or did he just waste $1,000 on a coin toss?
To answer that, we really have to start with the biology, because there's this misconception that it's just looking for cancer in some generic sense.
Right. And since Elton's a researcher, we can probably skip the Science 101 stuff. We know it's a liquid biopsy. But explain the mechanism, because that dictates why the test works and why it sometimes fails.
Precisely. We aren't just looking for, say, genetic mutations here. A lot of standard liquid biopsies look for mutated DNA, which can be like finding a needle in a haystack.
No.
The Galeri test is different. It's looking at cell-free DNA, cfDNA, methylation pattern.
Methylation, that's the key word.
It is. Methylation is essentially the epigenetic code. Think of them as chemical switches attached to your DNA that tell a cell what to be. A liver cell, a lung cell, a skin cell.
Right.
When a cell becomes cancerous, those methylation patterns, those switches, they go haywire in a very specific, very recognizable way.
So unlike a mutation test that might just say, hey, there's a problem somewhere, the methylation pattern is almost like a return address.
That's a great way to put it. Exactly. That's why the test can claim to identify the tissue of origin, or CSO. It's reading that epigenetic signature that says, I am a pancreatic cell, and I am behaving very, very badly.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge distinction.
It is.
Okay, so the tech is smart. Let's get to the controversy. Segment 1, the coin flip. This is the #1 criticism I see online. Dr. Eric Topol has been very vocal about it. The sensitivity.
But the test's ability to actually find cancer if you have it.
Right. It's often cited around 40 to 50%, depending on the stage.
That is the raw number, yes. If you have cancer, the test misses it roughly half the time.
And if I'm playing devil's advocate here, which I am, that sounds terrible, if I buy a smoke detector that only beeps for half the fires, I'm taking it back to the store. Why does Elton think this is acceptable?
Because your smoke detector analogy assumes you have other smoke detectors. Elton's argument, and it is a strong one, relies on the idea of additive value. He used a great car analogy. Imagine a collision avoidance system that only works 60% of the time. Do you disable it because it's not perfect?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Because avoiding 60% of crashes is way better than avoiding 0.
Correct. And that is the reality for the majority of cancers. We currently screen for, 5 types?
Yeah.
Breast, cervical, colorectal, prostate.
And lung. But only if you're a heavy smoker.
Right. For everything else, pancreatic, ovarian, esophageal, liver, the current detection rate is effectively 0 until you have symptoms.
And usually, by the time symptoms appear for something like pancreatic cancer, it's game over.
It's the grim reality. So Elton argues that catching 50% of those invisible cancers is a massive improvement over catching 0%.
Right.
And the Pathfinder 2 study really supports this additive view.
Let's get into those numbers. What did Pathfinder 2 actually find?
Well, it was a prospective study. They used standard screening on everyone, and they also used Galeri. Standard screening found 20 cancers.
Okay, 20.
But when they added Galeri, the detection rate for those cancers that have no screening options, it just skyrocketed.
The outline mentions a 7-fold increase. That sounds like marketing hype. Break that down for me.
It is a dramatic number, but you have to look at the baseline. If your baseline detection for, say, pancreatic cancer in a healthy population is 0, and you find even 1, that's an infinite increase mathematically.
I see.
But across the board, when you look at all the cancers combined, adding Galeri increased the total cancer yield by more than 7 times compared to just standard screening alone.
So the sevenfold isn't saying it's 7 times better than a mammogram.
No, not at all.
It's saying it found 7 times more cancer overall because it was looking in places the mammogram wasn't.
Exactly. About 75% of the cancers Galeri found in that study were types that we simply do not screen for today. So back to Elton's point. Is it a coin flip? Yes, on sensitivity. But it's a coin flip that gives you a fighting chance against a killer you otherwise would never even see coming.
But hold on. If we are casting this huge net, right, aren't we going to catch a lot of junk? Old boots and tin cans?
The false positive.
I have to talk about false positives. Elton called this the miracle of the test, that the false positive rate is virtually non-existent. Is he right, or is he just drinking the Kool-Aid?
He is actually right on the data. The specificity, the ability to correctly identify healthy people, is consistently reported at 99.5 to 99.6%.
So 8.5% false positive rate, half of 1%.
Which is incredibly low. I mean, compare that to a mammogram, which has a cumulative false positive rate of about 50% over 10 years of annual screening.
50%?
Yeah. The anxiety and the follow-up biopsies from mammography are a huge issue. Galeri is remarkably clean in that regard.
However, and here's where the researcher in Elton really needs to pay attention, we saw something really weird, something fascinating in the Simplify study out of Oxford. This is our segment 2 twist.
This is critical. So the Simplify study looked at people who went to the doctor with vague symptoms. They ran the Galeri test. Some people tested positive.
Right.
But then they did the full workup. You know, CT scans, MRIs, endoscopies, and they found nothing.
So a false positive. The test was wrong.
That was the initial conclusion. They labeled them as false positives, but, and this is the key, they didn't stop watching these patients. They followed them.
Yeah.
And within about 24 months, 1/3 of those so-called false positives were diagnosed with cancer.
Wait. So the blood test found the cancer 2 years before our imaging could even see it.
Essentially, yes. We call it the resolution gap. The molecular signal, the methylation in the blood, was present and it was detectable, but the actual tumor hadn't grown large enough to be visible on a CT scan, which usually needs a lesion to be about 1 centimeter to be definitive.
That is terrifying and amazing at the same time. It means the test was too accurate.
It really challenges our very definition of a false positive. If the blood test says cancer and the scan says clean, we usually trust the scan. This suggests that for a big subset of patients, maybe the scan is the one that's lagging behind.
Which just reinforces Elton's collision avoidance theory. If the alarm goes off, it is not a glitch. It is a serious pre-warning.
It could be.
But that brings us to the hard part, the price.
Yeah, economics.
Elton paid $1,000. He compares it to a colonoscopy, which costs thousands. He asks, why pay $3,000 to check one organ when I can pay $1,000 to check 50?
A fair question.
But we found a study in JAMA by Aziz and colleagues that says, hold on, not so fast.
Right. This is where we have to be very careful with our comparisons. The JAMA study found that if you try to use a liquid biopsy instead of a colonoscopy just for colorectal cancer screening, it's not cost effective.
Not at all.
In fact, they calculated the price would need to drop to about $56 to make sense.
$56. That is a massive gap from $1,000. Why is the math so bad there?
Because a colonoscopy is a unique beast. It is both diagnostic and therapeutic. If a doctor sees a polyp, they just cut it out right then and there.
They prevent the cancer from ever happening.
Exactly. A blood test is only detection. It can't remove the problem. So you catch the cancer, but you still have to pay for the colonoscopy to confirm it, plus the treatment. You lose that incredible prevention value.
Okay, so replacing a colonoscopy is a bad economic move. I get that. But Elton isn't suggesting we replace it. He's talking about the MCED approach, a lung cancer early detection.
And that changes the math entirely. The AJMC study modeled this exact scenario. They looked at the cost effectiveness of finding all those other cancers, the pancreatic, the ovarian, the really nasty ones.
Right.
And when you aggregate that value, the numbers shift completely. They found in ICER an incremental cost effectiveness ratio of about $66,000 per quality adjusted life year. QLE.
Okay, we need to unpack QLE for a second. This is basically how health economists decide if you're worth saving.
That's a crude way to put it, but
Okay.
essentially, yes. A QLO is 1 year of perfect health. In the U.S. healthcare system, if a treatment costs less than, say, $100,000 per QLA you gain, we generally call it cost-effective.
So at 66,000, Galeri is actually a bargain by those medical standards.
By U.S. standards, yes. The savings come from what we call stage shifting. Treating stage 4 cancer is just exorbitantly expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Immunotherapies can run you $150,000, $200,000 a year, often just to extend life by a few months. Treating a stage 1 cancer might just be a $30,000 surgery, and you're cured.
So you spend $1,000 now to avoid spending $200,000 later.
That is the macroeconomic argument. The AJMC model suggested that widespread use could shift about 7,200 cancers a year from late stage to early stage. That saves an average of over $5,000 per person in treatment costs over their lifetime.
But, and there is always a but, that average depends heavily on who is taking the test. And this is where Elton's email really hit the nail on the head. He talked about high-risk populations.
This is the big segment 4 win for Elton. The study by Raouf and colleagues in cancer epidemiology, biomarkers, and prevention is the smoking gun here.
So who are the big winners in this study?
It's people with a higher pretest probability of having cancer survivors, people with a high BMI, heavy smokers, and crucially, people with hereditary syndromes like Lynch syndrome or BRCA mutations.
It's a numbers game, right? If you test 1,000 healthy 25-year-olds, you're going to spend $1 million and probably find 0 cancers.
Exactly. The yield is terrible, but if you test 1,000 people over age 60 with a history of smoking or a previous cancer, the yield just skyrockets. For that group, the $949 price tag is mathematically dominant.
Elton used the fire insurance analogy. He said, it looks expensive for a concrete bunker, but it's cheap for a wood house in a dry forest.
It's a brilliant analogy. If you have those risk factors, age, history, genetics, you are living in that wood house. You want the sensors. And going back to your question about how this stacks up against breast cancer or colon cancer screening, those mass screenings are cost-effective because we target them by age. We don't give colonoscopies to teenagers. Galeri needs that same kind of discipline.
So if you're listening to this and you fit that profile, a survivor, family history, over 50, Elton's logic is pretty sound. But I want to circle back to the coin flip one last time because there's a psychological trap here.
A trap of false assurance.
Right. We established the sensitivity is around 50% overall. But for stage 1 cancers, the ones we really, really want to find, the sensitivity in earlier data was significantly lower, sometimes under 20%.
Pathfinder 2 showed some improvement there, but it's still a real concern. This is the danger zone. If you take this test and you get a negative result, it does not mean you are cancer-free.
No.
It simply means the test didn't find a signal today.
So if I'm Elton's wife and I get a negative result, I absolutely cannot cancel my mammogram.
Absolutely not. You cannot skip the colonoscopy. You cannot skip the pap smear. Remember, Galeri misses half of all cancers. If you use a negative Galeri result as an excuse to skip a colonoscopy that would have found a polyp, you have actually increased your risk of dying.
It has to be a complement, never a replacement.
It's an A&D, not an OR.
It's an A&D.
And we do have to mention the regulatory landscape. This is a laboratory-developed test, an LDT. That's why you saw a Super Bowl ad, but you don't see an FDA clearance stamp on it yet. The FDA is currently reviewing the data, but it's a long, rigorous process.
And the insurance companies are just watching from the sidelines, waiting for that massive NHS Galeri trial in the UK to finish up.
That is the big one. 140,000 people. Half get the test, half don't. And they aren't just looking at, did we find more cancer? They are looking at, did fewer people die?
Mortality data. The holy grail.
It is. Because there's a cynical view in medicine called lead time bias. If I find your cancer 5 years early, but I don't have a better treatment for it, did I really save your life? Or did I just make you a cancer patient for 5 years longer?
That is a heavy thought.
It is. But for things like pancreatic cancer, where late detection is a death sentence, early detection is the only hope for a cure. So that lead time bias argument holds a lot less water for those aggressive killers.
So let's wrap this up for Elton. He put $1,000 on the table. He bet that finding 50% of the hidden monsters is better than finding none. He bet the false positives are manageable. And he bet that for a high-risk family, the math just works.
I think the sources we've looked at today really do back him up. The coin flip critique misses the additive value. The false positive rate is exceptionally low, and some of those mystery positives might actually be ultra-early detection. And Economically, for a high-risk household, it is a rational purchase.
But the disclaimer is absolutely non-negotiable.
Right. We are researchers summarizing papers, not your doctors. This is not medical advice. And if you buy this test, you have to buy it with the understanding that a negative result is not a clean bill of health.
Elton, thanks for the email. You force us to really dig into the weeds on this one. It's rare we get a listener who is actually part of the research data.
It really brought the whole thing to life.
For everyone else listening, if you are living in that wood house in the forest, this might be something to look into. If you're in the concrete bunker, maybe you wait for the NHS results. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.